I know you wanted to talk about potential trade up, so let's start there. If the Bills, we're going to start with the top of the board now. We weren't really focused on too much about Brian Thomas. We weren't focused on the top 3 at the time because obviously last week we were talking more about who could be available at 28. Is it Legette? Is it Ladd McConkey, who he just came out and said he's met with the Bills multiple times, which I figured he's the perfect fit in Buffalo. And the lack of news around that was getting conspicuous. But I do think that Ladd McConkey is very much so in play, and especially isn't going to last further than the Kansas City Chiefs. But let's talk about the top 4 options, at least on Big Board's minds. We don't know how these guys are ranked. We don't know if there's a surprise top 4 pick here on somebody's board. We can only say what the experts have to say. And with that, I always use one of my favorite tools in the entire planet. It is one of my composite big boards because it doesn't take any bias into account of what one scout may like, what another may have to say. It does totally kind of average everything out for you at the receiver position. But how high could they get? I know you wanted to talk about trades, Kevin. Were you thinking about getting up to the teens, or were you talking about getting one of the big 3 in Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., or Rome Odunze?
As much as that sounds really appetizing, I just think that the cost is going to be way too much for what the Bills want to give up. So I found this list here earlier. Now, this is from CBS. So they have their top 10 wide receivers ranked here. And I think you can put these in tiers. Tier 1 is Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. Cutoff line. Then Tier 2, Brian Thomas Jr. Cutoff line. And then you have Tier 3, A.D. Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, Xavier Worthy. They have Keon Coleman, Javon Baker, and Troy Franklin. I'm a big Xavier Legette guy, but the point that I'm trying to make is those guys are all a tier below Brian Thomas Jr.
So now we have the big board up here, which is going to be a composite score of draft receivers across the league. That this is driving the statistics of the experts. So it's not using, like in the example we just had from I like CBS a lot, Chris Trapasso. But for some reason, he has, in my opinion, Javon Baker a little bit too high. He had him in like the 40s. Here we can see his composite score is much more in the 100 range. Will he go at 104? Remains to be seen. But his standard deviation, if you look at it, 51 picks difference between experts, which tell you that no one knows where Javon Baker is going to go. There's 51 picks difference between what people assume. So he's a very high volatile prospect on where he may go. But yes, if you look at here, Brian Thomas is very much considered to be the 4th guy. The biggest question people have right now is how much of a tier difference is there between Brian Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Adonai Mitchell, Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, Worthy, Franklin. And then we see Legette here. He's liked by ESPN, 26 that ESPN has him, but others do not have him as high. And then you have Roman Wilson, there, Ricky Pearsall. I know there's plenty of people that like what Ricky Pearsall can bring to it, his game. My favorite guy is Malik Washington there, 102, right near Javon Baker. Just a dynamic player with elite speed, elite quickness, elite separation. A guy now that's very much in consideration for what the Bills could be looking to do. So at the top, you have Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. 2 of them will be gone. The Bills don't really have a shot at it. If you believe that Harrison and Neighbors are 1 and 2, which, basically speaking, most people do believe, I don't think there's any realistic shot at those 2, Kevin. I don't know how high they can get. Now, the first question is, do you make a trade to get to 9 to consider Rome Odunze, who would be a perfect fit in this? The way he runs, his route running ability, and what he's able to do is a very natural fit for the Bills. PFF hates Brian Thomas Jr. Yeah, there are plenty of people that don't like him. We're going to get into him in 1 second here, right after Rome Odunze, who's a perfect fit for the Buffalo Bills. Somebody that I would love to get up to the higher positions, 9 to 11. I just don't think the Bills have the assets. They'd be basically going all in. The Bills may want to see how the trade market develops, but they would already kind of rule that out if they do make an aggressive trade to get up that high. You're looking at a similar trade for Julio Jones that we saw 10 years, 15 years ago now, roughly. You're going to be giving up your 2 firsts. So this year, next year, you're going to be giving up a 2nd and probably a 4 in there as well. So is that enough to get a stud receiver in Odunze for you, Kevin? Or that's about the cost, roughly?
I don't think I'm trading up any more than 15. Okay. Like if Odunze falls to 15 or 16, I'm running to the phones to try to strike a deal. But I don't think the Bills can afford to trade up into the top 10 because, look what they're doing. They're trying to build that second window of Josh Allen's career. They saved all that cap space next year by trading Diggs today. Like, they are in such good shape in 2025 and beyond that I don't think that they're going to want to strip their draft class. And I think they're going to want to build properly. So if anything, I see them trading into the teens, but nothing higher.
Okay. All right. I agree with you actually on this one. I don't see it happening. Is it a world that exists? I think we all have to acknowledge there probably is. There probably is a world where the Bills are like, to a question here we had, will the Bills make a trade prior to the draft? I think that's possible. I think that there is a world that on draft night, they could see how the draft goes. They could see the cost to move up. They could compare all these things and say, heck, it would only cost me one pick in order to get a guy like Brandon Ayuk. Maybe that's more cost beneficial than 3 to 4 picks to get up to get Rome Odunze. So the Bills could make that determination. But let's say they don't. Let's say they say, I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling the values in paying that player. What's it going to cost to go get Rome? I think they're going to explore it and realize that like they just can't release 4 of these assets when part of the reason was to stockpile these assets. It doesn't really sound like that is a possibility to me. So I am with you. So I think we are both in agreement here on the top 3 receivers. I don't even think Neighbors or Harrison are very realistic at all. And the off chance they could make something for Odunze, he is a perfect fit. He's a game changer. He's a guy that probably is going to be really good. I don't have much negative to say about Rome Odunze. I think that he's going to do everything you're looking for him to do and more. He's a studly receiver, 6'3", 212. I mean, I don't think he's lower than like 12 on anybody's big board. So you're getting a talented player there. It would make sense if the Bills do determine that they think they want to trade 3 to 4 to 5 assets to go get him. There is a world that makes sense. I don't think they'll be there. Kevin doesn't think they'll be there, but I do think that would it be that shocking? Ultimately, no, it wouldn't to go out and acquire a true number 1 receiver.
Put it this way. The only guy that I see the Bills trading up for and who I think makes sense based on those tiers that I rank them with is Brian Thomas Jr. So if he is there from 15 to 20, and especially if he slips past 20, I think that is a guy, based on if Brandon Beane actually likes him, like let's say he likes him, like he did Kyer Elam or Dalton Kincaid. Beane gets antsy. He gets anxious. I think you trade up for Brian Thomas Jr. Past BTJ, I'm not trading up for A.D. Mitchell. I'm not trading up for Troy Franklin. I'm not trading up for Ladd McConkey. So I think it only makes sense that if the Bills are going to trade up for a wide receiver, it's Brian Thomas Jr.
Okay, there you have it. And Brian Thomas, he's an interesting prospect because he's a one-year wonder by many regards. He's a big, tall, talented physical receiver. You know, some of the knocks about him are, does he use that physicality as much as he could, or does he just rely on that pure athleticism? That's part of the issue. He's had a negative WAR last in 2022 before really boosting and booming in 2023. So that is, something to remember that if you like those one-year receivers, he had a really good 1 year, but how much better than league average is he with his talent and production? That's going to be the big determination that teams are going to have to kind of break down from a cost benefit analysis of having to trade up. I would have zero issues with him if that was the pick. How high will I go? That remains to be seen. Kevin, you would go all the way up to 16, so you're essentially trading your first and second round picks for him.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you got to be careful with how high you go, but like, let's just say he slips to 20. I would go up to 20, and then I would just have to see what the compensation is for like that 16 to 19 range.
Yeah, I still think that's about a 2. Still think that's about a 2. Just because of how late the Bills' first round pick is. Don't forget they don't have a pick in the early 20s. So, if you kind of just use a basics of a trade value chart, it's still fairly accurate to at least look at. The Bills' pick is worth about $660 on the Jimmy Johnson trade. And if you're trying to get up to, I don't know, let's just say the Rams at pick 19, they're $875. So you're talking about about 225 points, which is a top of the 3. The Bills have a late 2. So you essentially could get up to 916 points. You could get up to the 17th overall pick with a 1 and a 2. Before you really drop much lower than that compensation, it's possible that you just saw what a trade was. The Texans dropping back a bunch of picks and only receiving a next year's second in return. So it's possible the Bills could utilize one of those next year's second to get up maybe to 22, 20, 21, at some point that would be allowed if they want to hold on to their 2 this year. But ultimately speaking, it's going to take them a 2 really to get up from pick 16 to pick 16, 17 all the way to like pick 22 is going to cost you essentially that. At what point do the Bills swing the trigger, Kevin? I think it's more at that 4. So at what point will someone accept that 4? That's probably only around pick 25, 24 to 25. And I think that's where I would be more comfortable if he is the guy.
So you're saying that would be pick 28 this year and then the second round pick that they acquired today from Diggs?
Correct. If you want to get up into like pick 20.
Yeah. And like, I think I'm still hesitant about giving up next year's first round pick. So that's what I'm saying. No. You just have to be careful with the compensation because to all the facts that we laid out here and the reasonings tonight, the Bills are totally building for 2025 and beyond, and obviously 2024 too. But I don't think they want to strip that. So I think whatever they can get for pick 28, the second round pick next year, and then if they want to throw in one of their day 3 picks because they still have a plethora of those, then do it. Someone like Pittsburgh is sitting at 20. I could see them trying to go get Brian Thomas Jr. Miami, you don't want to trade with a divisional opponent. Philadelphia, you mentioned them. I could see that. And then, Minnesota, Dallas, Green Bay, the Bills have relationships with those guys, trading with them in the past. So, yeah, like if they were to trade, let's just say they wanted to move up to 16 to try to get Brian Thomas Jr. before someone like Seattle could or Jacksonville. I don't think Jacksonville would want another receiver. Cincinnati's there at 18. The Rams are there at 19. I don't know. I just think that would still be too much. So yeah. I think it's 20 and below. So here's the thing. I was prepared to come into the show tonight and propose that the Bills trade back into the late 30s, early 40s, get Xavier Legette, and then find a safety with their actual second round pick. So, I mean, like, that could still be an option, but that would be a very laid back approach where I think the Bills need to be aggressive now that they got rid of Stefon Diggs. So, I mean, like, if you trade back and you can get Legette, cool. That's great. And then if you can get that safety in round 2 as well, even better. But can you imagine if you trade back and then you miss out on Legette because someone else sneaks in there and takes him? And then you're SOL because you don't have a wide receiver.
So a lot of some talk about trade back. I don't think the Bills are in any position to trade back right now. They need a premier player. Also, you would need somebody to want to come up to get 28. I don't think the Bills need to get the best player they can right now with the 5th-year option. That's part of the benefit to holding on to this pick. I think trade back is less likely now. Personally, I don't think they're going to want to wait to pick 45 to get it. So in order to get a 3rd round pick, you got to drop back fairly far, at least to the upper 40, like 41, 40, 39 to 45. I mean, you may have to even go to that 45 number to receive a 3rd round pick. I just think that that's too far. And you could have a runner of all these guys being gone at that point. They can't take that risk right now that they kind of already recovered a 2nd round pick next year from Diggs. They can't continue to stock. They got to start taking guys. So at some point they got to take whoever's the highest on their board going forward. So Kevin, let's talk to you. Who are you still thinking Legette? Where are you at with this whole discussion? And then maybe it is time to fire up a top 60 mock here. Kind of go through that.
Yeah, let's talk about these wide receivers, and then maybe we could talk about D tackle and safety a little bit as well before we fire up the mock. Because I think my favorite receivers here, aside from Brian Thomas Jr., are Xavier Legette and Troy Franklin. But to the point that I made last week, Troy Franklin's size worries me a little bit as he's only about 185. And we're trying to replace Diggs as that alpha dog, right? Like, I want a big-bodied receiver who can go up and make that tough contested catch. He can work the intermediate routes. He can use that physicality to his advantage. He can be a good blocker. I'm not sure if Troy Franklin fits as that wide receiver 1 now. So I do really like Xavier Legette because I think that he is raw and he can really develop into that. And that's why I love the idea so much, because I figured you could pair him with Diggs. Not anymore. So let me ask you this, Kevin. Do you think taking Xavier Legette at 28 would be potentially a reach? Like, is he more of a 2nd round prospect, or do you think that would be a healthy choice to take Xavier Legette at pick 28?
I'm not the largest Xavier Legette fan. I'm definitely in the camp of, for me, McConkey's my pick at 28. I think the Bills have now shown interest in him. He is what they're looking for. He gets open. He does everything well in zone and man. His reception rate's great. His coverage slippiness is strong. I just don't think I ever have one of those guys above him right now. That's who I just have this feeling he's going to go to KC if the Bills don't take him and be a pure torture for many, many, many years. I'm in the camp of the Bills do need to come away with the top rated receiver. It's a little different than the corner year where they're trying to force Tyree Elam a little bit. A 28, if Legette is the pick, I would really hope that he is, essentially receiver one at this point from day one. So it's tough to say because all these years we've been looking for a receiver too. Now the Bills have to look for both.
So like going based on my prototype here, like I'm not going to go after someone like Maki. Like I understand why you want to take him, but that would be something if the Bills had that size and they kind of had the room a little bit more well-rounded. But now if you strip it of Diggs and you have Ladd Maki, is he supposed to be a wide receiver one? Like I think that Maki is a nice supplement, but that's why it gets tricky. Like Xavier Worthy, he's crossed off my list. I'm not going to have a 160-pound guy walk in and say, hey, you're Stefon Diggs' replacement as wide receiver one. That's why I'm skeptical of Troy Franklin. He's only 185. Maki, 6 foot. I'm not sure what his weight is. I know he's good all around. Keon Coleman does have that size, but he lacks the separation. So that's why it gets very tricky. And I keep coming back to you either trade up for Brian Thomas Jr., you stay put and get Xavier Legette, or if you really want to risk it, you trade back. But that's getting a little bit too pushy based on the trade that happened today. So I think my top 2 targets are Brian Thomas Jr. and Xavier Legette.
I agree. I like Ladd Maki is one of my tie. And then I think that Worthy does present some challenges to defenses that the Bills would be looking for. His speed, his separation ability, his return ability, his catch percentage in terms of drops do check all the boxes. As much as I don't want a burner type of player, he could be very interesting here for the Buffalo Bills. And the more you just keep pointing to a receiver, needing a receiver one, the more I think the Bills are going to look for the best possible player. And rather than to fit a role, I think they're going to go with truly who they think is going to be the best boundary receiver for 5 to 10 years. So I think that they'll also be considering that over a certain style of receiver. So we'll see how much that matters. And yeah, there's much discussion about Maki having the same profile as Garrett Wilson. So a lot of deeper players that you could look at. I think the Bills at this point need to double dip. If you like a guy like Thrash or Johnny Wilson or Malik Washington, who's my favorite, we'll see where Javon Baker actually goes in this draft. And then, there's Troy Franklin, a guy that, the Bills had a private workout with him. So they're definitely very interested in Troy Franklin. Do they view him as a first round pick? Maybe he is the guy the Bills would have as a receiver. We don't really know. It could be Thomas Jr. It could be A.D. Mitchell. It could be Ladd. It could be Worthy or Franklin. It could be Legette. We really don't know who's the number 4 receiver on teams' boards, let alone the Buffalo Bills board. So it could be Troy Franklin. They like him.
I'm glad you brought up A.D. Mitchell because I didn't talk about him yet because I was going based on the prototypical size. Now, sure. I think A.D. Mitchell has what we're looking for here, but the fact that he admits that he takes plays off and he could have lazy route running, that scares me because the Bills essentially got rid of a diva with Stefon Diggs. And if you have a guy that's coming in saying I only play when I want to, that screams diva to me. So why would you replace a diva with another diva? And maybe I shouldn't classify him as a diva just now, but I'm skeptical on A.D. Mitchell. And that's why he's not that high on my board.
Just anything specific, just work ethic. What specifically jumps out the most to you about AD?
Yeah, basically. And I don't know him that well to be able to say that he doesn't put the work in, but just the fact that some of his routes might get lazy, that has that diva mentality where he might have that personality where he's show me the money. I'm only going to perform when I want to. And then once you pay me, I'm not going to perform. I get skeptical with that stuff. And I think the Bills do too. So I'm not sure if you're trying to replace Stefon Diggs. I'm not sure if A.D. Mitchell is the guy for that. I will say, seems like he's a very good route runner, has good separation, good size. Football-wise, he does seem to have it. It's just, does he have it 100% of the time?
The funny part is, to this point now, is it time to talk about other positions? At some point, the Bills, maybe he's not better than some of those players, some other positions, but when will need take over? They can't just keep neglecting at some point you have to do something there.
But that's another reason why I was just so puzzled by the Stefon Diggs trade, because the Bills did a great job of filling all of their needs. Like, they filled those holes, right? And you were thinking that Brandon Beane can go into the draft and literally take the best player available. And as much as we wanted to find that wide receiver too, you thought, okay, if Latu is there, maybe you take an edge rusher. If Byron Murphy slips, you take him. Johnny Newton slips, you take him. But now the Bills have to draft for a need at the moment. Maybe there's still another corresponding move. There's a lot to think about here, because it's just going to get very, very hard to find that wide receiver if you go D-line in the first round.